Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone in Blueberry World all around the world. I'm Cort Brazelton here with Colin Fain, Sara Ilyas, and Violetta, and other members of the IBO Report team. And we are here to give you an abridged online seminar as we launched the 2025 edition of the International Blueberry Organization's State of the Industry Report. Our president of the IBO, Mario Stata, is here to kick us off. And so, Mario, I'm going to pass it over to you to say a few words, and we will do our best to efficiently move through this content. There is a question section in here. If you'd like to ask questions, we'll do our best to get to those at the end of this 1 hour session. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mario.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you. Hello to everyone for joining. We have a fairly big group which speaks precisely for the way I think we all see the logic of the industry and particularly how IBO works, no, to bring relevance, clarity, information, commitment to the industry. So, we would expect that many of you probably didn't make it to South Africa to the summit. I'm sure you heard about the outcome of the meeting, which was really good from what we could perceive by the people that were there. And obviously, we would like to think that you being here speaks precisely for the intent of understanding what's happening on the logic of what the report represents. Um, the industry report is probably one of the best examples, as we said, of an industry coming together and generating value. And the more we see things evolving, the more we understand that data was, is, and will become even stronger on the logic of what business does, what business is, and what business wants to be. And there's really no better example, when you think of the horticultural industry globally than this report. And I think the question is why, and that's what we're going to see today. First, because of the quality of the information, since it was launched years ago, it was, from the start, really strong on the quality component, and it's only getting better. And so that's one. I think the analysis that comes with the data is also really important on the logic of the descriptions, not the context of what data represents, because you could look at numbers and then don't have clarity of exactly what the numbers mean and how they relate to each other, particularly in a global report. And as you can see from what the report provides, beyond the data, it's the analytics, it's the information, and the descriptive elements of it. The next element is because of the many years of developing and generating the report, is the capability now to look at really reliable historical information, and with historical information, obviously, build up a logic of trends and what's the likely outcome of things based on how the industry is growing. And so that in itself already brings additional value to the work that's been done for years on the logic of the report. And obviously, probably the best example this year is on the way, the global volumes are evolving, the role of Peru. I mean, we talk about it a lot. The report obviously provides clarity of input as to what's evolving on the different regions, and Peru in particular, because of the weight of what Peru represents. You link that to pricing and trends, and then you start getting a very interesting picture of what the reality of the industry is and what that reality might be as we go into the future. I'll wrap it up with a couple of comments. Obviously, the report is as good as the input. We want to thank, as IBO, for the input people provide and the time taken, to work with Colin and the group and Agronometrics and with Cort on really providing deep and realistic objective information. And we encourage everyone to make sure that what's provided and anything you can bring in on a very objective manner, you do bring in to strengthen what IBO does, what IBO reports on the logic of this document. And obviously, we do expect and hope that many of you will for sure be participating at the different events we hold. So we have the summit in South Africa. We are planning, obviously, to have again Fruit Logistica, coming together Fruit Attraction, as we did a year ago. We do have our annual general board meeting in Fruit Logistica, so many of us will be in Berlin in January. And then obviously we're working to define who's going to be on on board to make the 2027 summit happen between basically Peru, Chile, China, the US, and it could be actually that Morocco comes on board also actually to part of the process of making the summit. So thank you, Cort, Colin. I pass it on to you, and I'm glad you're having this organized and that we're all here together. So I look forward to this hour of learning once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mario. So real quick, I'm going to pass this baton to Colin, but want to recognize, I'm going too fast, here we go. 18 years ago, this report began as a very small project led by one person. It has been an absolute privilege to have Colin, Matt, Claudio, Violeta, and Sara come in over the years and really professionalize this work. As Mario said, it gets better every year. I'd like to say thank you to this team. We are going to do our best to be focused and efficient here. If you're wanting more on any of these slides, that's why there's a very extensive report. It's free to download. Thank you to our sponsors. And I'm going to pass the baton to you, Colin, to recognize that part since you've organized that work.
All right, so a pleasure to have you guys all here. Thank you very much, Cort. Thank you very much, Mario. Thank you very much, delegates from around the world that are joining us today. And definitely thank you very much to all of the sponsors that make this report possible. This report is made freely available to the entire Blueberry community, putting our heart, soul, and the best data that we have available into your hands. And that's all thanks to the contributions by the different companies that you see on this screen. If you're interested in putting your logo up on the screen as well, please reach out. There's an email down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll see about getting you into the next year's version. Let's see. With that, we'll jump right into global pricing trends. And this is a very interesting chart. It's one of the ones that has been most looked at. So every year, from the people that reply to or that downloaded the report, we send out a survey, and we're sending that out right now. We encourage everybody to participate. But that tells us what parts are most interesting and which ones are least interesting from the report. And this one has been consistently labeled as one of the most interesting ones. Here, what we're looking at is the volumes on the bottom and the prices on the top. And we can see how blueberries as a whole has seen this spectacular growth with incredibly stable pricing over the last nearly 10 years. 2023 was a big jump for our industry on the heels of El Nino and its effects on southern producing regions, namely Peru. And we can see the effects on global pricing that had. These are import pricing. So keep in mind, it does not consider local production. That's relevant to the US and Europe and China, as it were. But it does give you the best objective picture that we can build on a global market for blueberries. What's interesting is that we saw volumes rebound in 2024 and the price stayed relatively stable. There's a lot of reasons for that. But what this reflects, if nothing else, is a steep and growing increase in demand for blueberries as a category. We can see that these shifts in prices weren't localized to one region or another, especially because of the role of Peru, now representing about 30% of global exports. We see the impact from their production and the delay in 2024 affect not only the Americas, the biggest recipient of fruit in the world, EMEA, which kind of receives as much fruit as America, and also in Asia. But this increase in price was a global phenomenon. And here we can see where the prices had increased. 2022 was a relatively stable year, where there was a massive amount of influx, unexpectedly large, from Peru, and that maintained prices stable throughout the year. 2023 saw hiccups in production related to Europe, which mostly is reflected at the beginning of the season. And then you saw El Nino and the massive jump right in Peru's season. Peru's peak is in October, and you get to see what the impacts of Peru were in 2023. In 2024, Peru's production was delayed, and you get to see how that had a massive impact on prices. When the bulk of their fruit came in a bit later in the season, prices fell off quickly, and that's what we're able to see in the global pricing. Jumping quickly into production survey. This is a survey that we send out at the beginning of the year, so this one's not currently out, but we definitely encourage everybody that's a part of this conversation to participate and give us your opinion over how the industry is performing in your local area, as it were. What we're able to see from this survey is that the general feel for the industry has improved dramatically from 2023 to 2024. In this survey, we break out the different factors that could contribute to this. So we can see growth in demand was seen as very positive. Also, the cost of fertilizers and petrol, 2023 being closer to the start of the Ukraine war, and still reeling from those effects. The 2022 survey showed an even greater impact on costs of fertilizers and petrol, and we can see that leveling out. Cost of labor was one of the most difficult issues for the entire industry, and we saw that dive again this year. And we can generally see like how the global perception of each one of these factors is on the blueberry industry through this survey. A really interesting kind of addition to this year's report was breaking out the survey by individual origins. So we had a special report on South Africa, and that's what we're seeing here, is the responses to the survey from South Africa compared to the global average. I think the one that stands out the most is, so the South Africa responses are the dark ones, and the global responses are the light blue ones, which light blue was the same color we used for the global compared to the 2023 report. And we can see labor availability stands out. And that's a theme within Southern Africa that's not necessarily shared with many other growing regions in the world. And that's one example of how this region differentiates itself and how it might be able to build a strategy for its production compared to other parts in the world. To learn more about, for example, how these different factors affected Peru, Chile, the US, Poland, or any other of the major producing regions, we encourage you to dive into the report. Another addition was the Net Promoter Score. Generally speaking, this question was made when people downloaded the report. So anybody that goes and downloads the report, we ask you, how would you be willing or interested to encourage other people to join the industry? The response to this question was 43.9, which is very, very good response. This is firmly in the great range. Basically, anything above a 0 is really good. Anything above a 70 is enviably good. We're in a solid, really, really good as an industry. As we broke this question out by the different regions, IBO members were generally much more positive or willing to invite others to join the industry. And we can see what the breakout looks like by country. I'm not going to dwell on this for very long. It's a brand new study. We're going to be able to add to this with as we add in new years. The most interest or the most excitement about the industry seems to be coming from the UAE, Ecuador, Georgia. These are up and coming growing regions. And it's interesting that, for example, the United States and Spain and some of the more established producing regions were really close to the average Net Promoter Score, most all of them being very positive. I mean, the line down the middle is the average for the entire industry, which is generally speaking all very positive. And this leads us into industry trends, where I'm going to pass the baton off to Cort.
Thank you, Colin. So again, everybody who's joined since our opener, we're going to do our best to be brief on all of these. If you're wishing for more information, please do download the report. It's a short 200+ page report. You can flip through it for the things you want and follow the table of contents, but naturally we expect everyone to read every single word and all 200+ pages. In the meantime, we're going to do we'll do some big picture trends. So one of the first things that stood out in our work, and this was a realization with Matthew Ogg, as well as Colin and the team on the data, one of the things people didn't talk a lot about in the interviews was the given assumption such that no one mentioned it, and that is the profound impact of Peru. 15 years ago, the Peruvian industry, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. It was in early trialing and commercial phases, but it has now become 1/3 of global fresh supply. It's set a new benchmark for quality and consistency and availability. And there's also some trends there on tariff diversification that we dive into in the report. But as a standout, the fact that we didn't bring up its impact as a major trend in the interviews was such a trend that we recognized the trend. We start to take for granted how much the industry has changed, driven by generally new developments in sources of supply, genetics, horticulture, and market development. Got a little bit of a lag here. The other big one is category growth and the premiumization trends within the category. So interestingly, in 2024, there was a real standout. At first glance, it looks like general category value increased considerably in 2024. But a double click on that reveals that a lot of that driver, a lot of that impetus for increasing category value was actually subcategories. Some of these jumbos or better flavored profiled blueberries that are getting presented differently at retail and to consumers and driving significantly higher ring value at retail and a more compelling return back to the farm. And so the key here is that is not necessarily driving value in the same way to all parties. What's also interesting is this early stage of category segmentation, right now largely driven by this niche premium category that there was an interview with Garland Ryder with the Business of Blueberries podcast a few weeks ago that I think really hammered this home. There's only so much capacity for that premium category, 10, 15%. If you look at some of the other more mature products out there that still capture real value with consumers, there's a huge opportunity for sustained category development, and that has indeed stood out in our interviews. As you'll notice, I'm not going to read these bullets to you. You can read them. I'm going to just call out the big trends. The other thing is this growth paradox. We have uneven growth dynamics. There are industry participants, growing regions, individual companies, individual growers that are capturing a disproportionate amount of the available growth in volume and margin. And then there are others who are seeing the value growth outstrip volume growth. There are those who are also seeing declines in their returns. So there's a big widening price bifurcation. Going back to that comment on what's happening in value growth, we're finally starting to see price differential within the category. Now we can simplify that and say that's about quality, but it's also about quality at scale relative to total volume and its consistent availability so that those categories at retail can be developed on the fresh side. Note a lot of this is really fresh oriented trends. The process industry is seeing a bit less of this at this juncture. So in general, we are seeing a bimodal industry rising in a lot of ways. There is a rising risk of generic product oversupply at the same time that there's a shortage of certain categories within the blueberry sector. And profitability is not necessarily a guarantee. I think personally, we are a year, 2, max 3 out from a number of substantial disruptions, not necessarily driven by volume, but also general carrying capacity, labor, logistics, and the capacity of industries on the supply side or markets on the receiving side to sustain the rate of growth we have underway. The other big standout in the interviews with contributors, hundreds of contributors to this report, is the rising awareness of the importance to balance out the growth in our industry with a stronger high chill position on the genetic side, as well as an increased focus on mechanized harvesting, particularly for high chill, but also across all chill categories. Now, the mechanization focus is obviously driven by a concern about labor availability and labor cost. For those who haven't spent time looking at where humanity is going from a demographic perspective, it is quite stark what the demographic structure of most countries looks like today and what it will look like in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And it's cause for pause. around how we will get our crop harvested over the next human generation, and we need to get ahead of it. On the high chill side of the equation, it's important to recognize that most of the really breakneck growth in the blueberry industry on the supply side, as well as this new quality-driven category over the last 10 years, has been driven by low and zero chill blueberries. Growing regions like Mexico, Morocco, southern Spain, California, southeastern US, particularly Peru, and then southwestern China and parts of southern Africa coming behind that. That has balanced out availability, but it has also left a real gap in the northern hemisphere summer and the southern hemisphere summer in terms of total supply relative to total quality at scale as a percentage of supply. And thus, there's a lot of new interest in high chill genetics, new high chill growing systems, a heightened interest in high chill breeding, a much longer cycle process, what one of our contributors called like watching paint dry. But there is also high caution on the growing side. The risk of adopting new high chill genetics is substantially higher because of the time for return on investment and the internal rate of return on those projects. So there's a full deep dive in these trends in the report. If you want to learn more, this is a critical part. A good friend of mine always said, looking at high chill as part of a risk-adjusted portfolio in the industry is critical and time sensitive, because if we as an industry are going to have balance in supply and quality as a percentage of total supply 5, 7, and 10 years from now, we need a stronger high chill component. As we all know, in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of institutional and investor capital that's come into our industry. This was the first year that this trend was mentioned less because it's become so accepted and such a norm within our industry. But it has had a profound impact on fueling the growth, particularly the growth in the areas that have offered highest return in the last 5 and 10 years, mainly in low and zero chill up and coming growing areas. And it has changed the face of the industry. We've gone from small and medium-sized farms to a large concentration of medium and also very large farms, as well as the rise of various multinational operators, both vertical and virtually integrated companies. The high chill component kicks into this as well, since a lot of this capital has gone to low and zero chill category. And so one of the conversations that came up very often is the importance for this capital to diversify its allocation into the high chill space, as well as other geographies. As Mario mentioned, we had a great event down in Southern Africa. One of the standouts in Southern Africa relative to other major sources of supply in the spring and fall windows in the Northern Hemisphere is the absence and the missed opportunity for investor and institutional capital to be better allocated to that part of the world. All right, I'm going to pass the baton, Sarah. I believe this is to you for global statistics, yes?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Cort. Hi, everyone. Now I'll take you through some of the charts from the global stats section of this year's report. This part focuses on the numbers looking at how global production, planted area, and yields evolved during the 2024 season and what they reveal about the blueberry industry's continued globalization and maturity. So first, we take a look at global cultivated hectares by region. Here, what we see is that in 2024, global cultivated hectares reached an estimated 282,193 in total. What stands out here is how balanced the global footprint has now become. The Americas once dominated blueberry production, but over time, EMEA and Asia Pacific have expanded rapidly, reflecting the crop's evolution into a truly global commodity. Just a decade ago, over 90% of all blueberries were being consumed in the US and Canada. Today, the fruit is embedded in diets across Europe, Asia, and beyond. Now, let's take a look at how much of this global base is now in full production, which takes us to our next slide, which covers global cultivated hectares by status. Here we see that in 2024, about 17% of total planted hectares were actually not in commercial production. This was down from 17.6% in 2023. This shows that a growing share of plantings is maturing and entering the production phase. It is also a reflection of the industry's maturation in the Americas and EMEA. So now that we know that more of the planted base is coming online, let's take a closer look at where those hectares are located, how they're distributed globally, and what that means for production, which takes us to global cultivated hectares by region. In this table, we see that in 2024, if you look at the distribution, the Americas remain in the lead with roughly 42% of global planted hectares. Next is Asia Pacific, which now represents about 38%, followed by EMEA accounting for about 20% of the world's planted base. Next, we turn to production, which sees a similar sort of ranking. The Americas contributed around 46% of total global blueberry production. Asia Pacific followed with 35%, and EMEA accounted for roughly 19%. So while the Americas still hold the largest share, Asia and EMEA together now produce more than half of the world's blueberries, confirming that this is no longer a Western Hemisphere dedicated crop, but a truly global industry. Now let's take a look at production by use and see how much is going to fresh and processed sites, which brings us to global cultivated production by use. And here we see that roughly 22% of production in 2024 went to the processed segment, with the remaining 78% sold as fresh blueberries. This is a big change compared to the 50-50 ratio days that we saw for most of the crop's history. This imbalance tells a clear story that the fresh market continues to dominate global demand. Processed production isn't growing at the same pace, largely because most growers prioritize fresh fruit. Next, let's look at how this translates regionally, where the biggest volumes are being produced and how the balance has shifted, which brings us to global cultivated production by region. Here, what we see is that in 2024, once again, the Americas share remained below 50% for the third consecutive year. This is a clear sign that the global landscape has shifted. To understand this balance better, let's zoom in on the sub-regional picture to see which areas within these regions are driving most of the growth, which brings us to this table. Here we take a closer look at the numbers, and we see that within the Americas, which makes up 46% of global output, South America dominates, producing about 50.46 of the region's volume. And US and Canada together accounted for about 42.53 of the section in Americas. So this percentage is the total from Americas itself and not the total. So, and when we move on to Asia Pacific, we'll take a look at mainland Asia, which is leading in China, which is leading in the Asia Pacific region, accounting for about 94.6% of the region's output. Finally, we move to EMEA, which is responsible for 19% of global production. Within it, Southern Europe and North Africa lead with about 46.2% of the regional volume. So here what we see is that while global production remains concentrated in the Americas, growth is clearly coming from South America, China, Southern Europe, and North Africa. These are the main engines driving blueberry supply worldwide. So now we move on to the next slide, which is global cultivated hectares and production. This slide actually combines the hectares and production data to highlight how planting base and output are distributed globally. We see that the Americas remain the largest producing region, as we noted earlier, but their relative dominance continues to erode as new regions are gaining ground. Next, we move on to the next slide, which looks at yields. So we try to understand how efficiently each region is producing on a per hectare basis. Here we see that average global yields have actually improved in 2024, rising from around 8,081 kgs per hectare in 2023 to about 9,191 kgs per hectare in the current season, that is 2024. So the increase shows partial recovery from last year's climate-related disruptions. These were mainly due to El Nino. And with these yields recovering and new hectares maturing, let's see what that means for overall production growth and the industry's direction. Which brings us to global cultivated production metrics. Here we see that the 2024 metrics confirm that the industry is back on a growth trajectory after a very challenging year. The key driver behind total output this year was the addition of new productive hectares, while yield recovery also played a part. This reinforces the idea that the sector has significant latent production potential. Now we move on to global cultivated production by country. This visualization actually captures the geographical depth of this industry. Blueberries are now cultivated across dozens of countries from the Americas and Europe to Africa and Asia, highlighting how global the industry's base has become. This slide serves as a great reminder of how blueberries have evolved from a regional specialty crop into a global commodity sector. Now to look ahead at what this means for the next few years, including how production is expected to evolve globally and which regions are likely to lead the growth, I'll hand it over to Colin, who will walk us through the global production projections. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Another one of the sections that was highlighted to us as very meaningful for the industry is the global production projections. And as we look at these figures and the outlook of nearly a 50% growth in the industry in 2028, it's important to note that this is a forecast. By definition, every single forecast is wrong. This one included, without a doubt. It ends up, and I think anybody in their own lives has this perspective that predicting the future is very, very challenging. And rarely do you see it be true. This forecast is built based on a machine learning algorithm that we developed in-house, where we look at the production of hectares planted for every single region in the world individually. We look at what's actually produced. So you have 3 different levels. You have hectares planted, what's actually in production. So for some regions, for example, the high chill variants, we got 4 years of a heads up of what will be coming into production in the near term. For other regions like Peru, that's going to be much shorter. And we look at this projection compared to how yields have been evolving for each one of the regions. The forward-looking projections are individually calculated for every single region in the world, which we have more than 200 of them. And that's what gives us these numbers. That said, this is the quantitative analysis. So this is looking at the historic numbers, looking at assuming similar geopolitical conditions that allowed us to create these numbers, which, as we can see in the news, might be quite different going forward, and similar weather conditions as we have seen in the past, taking out El Nino from 2023. Cort has some windage to add to this purely qualitative analysis, and I'll let him chime in on it.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So just a few things. I'm sure you're all trying to calculate what does this mean for fresh supply, since most people in the audience here are from the fresh industry. Sarah shared a figure earlier on the percentage of processed versus fresh in global high bush volume. And I want to point out that in 2024 was the lowest diversion to processed in the history of the crop as a percentage. Historically, it's 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 fresh, 1/3 processed over the last 25 years. Before that, 50-50, and even some years in the last 20, 50-50. And now it's reaching more of an 80-20. I believe that will reside as well as a lot of varieties become obsolete, but remain in the obsolete for certain fresh uses, but remain in the ground and get diverted to processed. I think there's a number of countries where we'll see that happening. So I think we'll probably get back to a 70-30 breakdown. So if I was going to trust these numbers as real, which I don't think they're feasible, if I was going to trust these numbers as real, I would apply a 70-30 mix, which would put us around 2.1 million metric tons fresh by 2028-29. I do think the industry will get to 3.2 million metric tons within the next 5 to 7 years. But I also expect it to slow down. Why do I think it's going to be hard to realize this? I only think there's a 30% chance of us reaching this. I think there's a 40% possibility of this number in 2028-29 being lower, and a 30% chance of it being a little bit higher. So very difficult, lots of speculation. We have increasing difficulties around access to land and water. Labor is increasingly a hindrance in a lot of these areas. There's an acceleration of the rate of replanting particularly in low and zero chill growing regions, but also an uptick in replanting in the high chill growing regions. I think we will see an increasing percentage of total hectares being replanted rather than coming from new hectares. Now that's from a very low base today globally, less than 15%, less than 10 in most geographies, but that will also contribute. Throw on top of that climate change and an increasing variable climate together with geopolitical disruptions, as Colin mentioned. I think we need to be cautious on treating this as real. With that said, the industry has arrived to almost 1.7 million metric tons of fresh supply in 2024. And I think it is completely feasible that by 2030, we can expect between 2.2 and 2.4 million metric tons of total fresh supply by 2030. We will also have up and down years. If you look at that dip in 2023, I think we should anticipate another one for a variety of reasons. But the long-term 10-year trajectory is what it is. I'm not sure the angle of the curve is exactly this, but I think we should expect sustained growth in the industry in terms of supply. What will pricing do? I think we see pricing trends in this bimodal industry developing as having an increasing influence on how this is going to play out. So I think we need to look at this with caution, but the prediction of sustained growth in the coming years is real. The hardest part is the shape of that curve. As Colin stated, the model we use needs to use real data. What's the data we have? It's historical, but to the degree new trends have an outsized influence over the next 5 years, that can change this. I can say without a doubt, the total fresh supply over the last 5 years has outstripped my expectations of total fresh supply. I've also been surprised how much the process industry has not grown at the same rate.
All right, I think a recurring theme, which we explicitly mention in the report and which is also part of this forecast, is we know that this data is not perfect. And we haven't mentioned it in this presentation yet, but it's important to mention. This is the best, not perfect data that we can possibly offer. This whole report is built in good faith, bringing the best information that we're able to collect qualitatively and quantitatively from around the industry. And this forecast is a reflection of all of that. I mean, you're bringing together the entire report to look forward as best as we possibly can. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it is the best, not perfect report that we're able to put together. So we'll wrap up the data section with a look at wild, which I think, as Cort mentioned, has been particularly stable over the last couple of years. We see Canada continues to be the largest contributor in the world, as best as we can measure, with the United States closely followed after. This is a section that we're still constantly looking to improve. And we'll continue to invest in researching data sources from around the world that are able to contribute to this picture as best we can. But the biggest trend being not only the volume that it's bringing to market, which is respectable, but also its stability over the last couple of years compared to the fresh sector. And here we kind of bring together all of the data that we have available. So this is wild blueberries, this is high bush blueberries, all brought together in comparing fresh and processed. Most all of wild goes directly to process. So that's where you're going to see those figures reflected. And most all of the other contributions are going to come from high bush blueberries. And that gets us to a global total, which saw a considerable jump in 2024 to 2,151 metric tons for blueberry consumption, or for blueberry production. When we start looking at consumption, there's going to be spoilage from the farm gate and the data that we're able to manage to actual consumers. It's just incredibly difficult to measure that, and we haven't figured out a reliable way of doing so yet. So this is the best data that we're able to offer at this point. With that, I'll hand the baton back off to Cort so we can look at the top 10s from around the world.
Right. Colin and I started doing this top 10 outline, and we're going to run quickly through this so we can get to questions. I think we started doing this about 6 or 7 years ago, and I've actually found it to be quite useful. So I'm going to move quickly through this and just call out a few of the trends playing out in the changes here. The top 10 countries by total planting in the world have remained relatively stable. The only shift has been a change in position by Spain and Ukraine. I think it's important to call out that these 10 countries represent almost 85% of all global plantings. And so consumption has grown considerably around the world. These 10 remain the primary sources, and they're pretty evenly spread in terms of total hectares across the Asia-Pacific region, the Americas, and Europe, Middle East, Africa, recognizing that South America produces heavily for all three major Northern Hemisphere markets. And also note on the far right for all of these is the most recent data, 2021 is the further back data. The size of the columns is a little confusing. Apologies there. Big shift here in the top 10 for production by high bush cultivated blueberries. Morocco has moved up. Mexico has dropped their total number of hectares and their yield per hectare, particularly in 2024. 25 so far has been a better year, but Mexico has faced a number of challenges. The Sinaloa growing industry has faced real issues in quality and other performance challenges. The central Mexico is facing a number of issues around pest diseases, yield, there's a lot of discussions around climate change. Canada and Poland saw lower yield years, while Morocco has sustained its growth as a competitive source of supply for late winter and spring blueberries for primarily Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And China remains the top producer, especially when you consider their large process component. On the fresh side, China remains number one still, though close to Peru. It's interesting, Peru is now the second largest fresh producer in the world if we treat the Chinese data as accurate, which is always a struggle. The United States, number three, Chile. Morocco again has moved up, Poland moving down, and South Africa has surpassed Canada as a major source of fresh high bush supply. And these countries together represent almost 90% of global fresh supply, right here. China, Peru, US, Chile, Spain, Mexico, Morocco, Poland, South Africa, and Canada are almost 90% of global fresh supply. On the process side of the equation, this is important because the China figure represents a very, very low contribution to IQF, the higher end product, whereas the United States and Chile really own the IQF category, particularly the Pacific Northwest of the United States, together with British Columbia and Canada, and central south of Chile really own the global IQF market. And so those are the heavy hitters in the process industry as we know it. Poland's contribution to process has increased considerably over the last few years, and South Africa has a higher diversion more recently to process, some of that due to some other disruptions in their ability to ship fresh. When there are issues, more product does go to process. Most of the industries past Peru, this is byproduct. These are not process-focused industries. The only industries that have dedicated operations focused solely on processed are in China for low-grade juice products, even Maotai, if you've ever had that type of hangover. And US, Chile, and Canada are really the dominant players in IQF. And then for the top exporters, the top fresh exporters in the world, Peru has become by far the world's leading global exporter of fresh blueberries. The Netherlands shows up here because of the best, and in defense of Colin and the team, we all know the Netherlands does not produce 125,000 metric tons of blueberries, but it certainly does re-export a lot with the port of Rotterdam. So Netherlands is a major re-exporter. The other major actual producer exporter, the number two player in the world, is Chile, followed by Mexico. Chile has surpassed Mexico now, Morocco, and then Spain, mainly cross-border throughout Europe. And the US has grown considerably. That does include exports to Canada and Mexico. A call out that Mexico is becoming an important consuming market for its domestic product, as well as exports from the United States and other sources of supply. Hong Kong is also another major re-exporter of blueberries. And then total importers. Largest importer in the world is still the United States, but if you add up all the European countries together with the UK, you actually get a comparable volume for total imports of fresh blueberries. So things are balancing out. There was a time when Europe was consuming less than 10% of global supply just in the last 8 or 9 years. This is a big shift. So while the US is a major importer, cumulatively, Europe and the UK has become very large, and the rate of growth in China together with Hong Kong is really quite considerable. So conclusions and recommendations. This is where I get a little editorial. On the macro level, This story of category value and volume growth is really important. The growth in the category is uneven. This premium category has driven a lot of the value growth. I think we should expect to see more creativity on the category segmentation side. We need to create more occasions for blueberry consumption if we're going to be able to grow this category, as well as the consumer habit around the world that we want to augment. But there is a significant opportunity in the broader category. We also see quality at scale and market bifurcation. There are nearly 7 months of the year now where there is substantial supply of better quality blueberries, and better quality is measured by my measurements by not just pricing, but lower shrink, longer shelf life, consistency and size, and just generally more positive consumer feedback via retail. There are 7 months of the year now where this category of, let's just say, more reliable product is available, and it is having a profound impact on consumption. That's driven by new genetics, new sources of supply, and a lot of professionalization throughout the industry. And that bimodal pricing trend is playing out. There are winners and losers in this, and there are participants and those who are excluded. And it is being fueled by a lot of investor capital as well. So the household penetration, while slow and almost stagnant in the United States, there's a consumer usage and attitude survey that came out recently indicating that for us to grow this category, we have to address some of the consumer experience issues around the consistency of the product. Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are growing rapidly from, albeit smaller bases in the case of Asia and the Middle East. But Europe is a poster child for how much we can grow this category, and it still continues to go. Existing consumers are consuming a very large amount of blueberries, particularly in the major established markets like the US and the UK. New consumers are now a major driver for consumption growth as well. There are structural challenges: land, water, labor, climate, capital, talent, policy, geopolitics, and trade policy are all factors starting to affect us. It's one of the reasons why I get nervous around forecasting in the industry. That being said, this is going to be all about highest quality, most cost competitive looking into the future. Blueberries have the potential to be the #1 fruit. That's my humble opinion in the global fruit category. They're just too convenient, too healthy, and too easy to eat. And when they're good, people want them. One of the big questions I have is, how will we surmount these supply side pressures to assure growers are profitable and that we continue to deliver to consumers what they want in terms of product quality, presentation, and price point? So the industry outlook. Big picture, long-term consumption growth trend is really encouraging, but disruptions are going to be inevitable. We are going to face supply shocks and price shocks multiple times over the next 5 years, and I think we should be ready for it. Also important to recognize that after 25 years of almost defying gravity of sustained growth and on average pricing that has been quite steady and at times even growing at the same speed as the category volume, that trend is slowing. The industry is maturing and we're entering a new phase. It's no longer about having blueberries. It's about having better blueberries and creating value to consumers and category segmentation. That's more complex. It's also harder to scale now than it used to be. So the easy times are behind us. And there's a section in here that dives into those details in the report. Strongly advise, if you're thinking about investing in the industry, read this report. Don't look how it's been. Think about what it's going to be like over the next 5 to 7 years. This will not be the same. We're going to need more innovation, accelerated innovation, better strategies for managing risk while adopting new technology and adapting to new realities. And the IBO is going to strive to deliver the best information and support it can to help empower the industry to make healthy decisions. So with that, I think we need to get quickly to questions. Colin, I'm going to let you close this out and recognize the team. And I see we have some questions in the chat.
Yep, and there are actually some really good questions. So we'll go through this really quick. Again, many of you that contributed to this report will have spoken to Matt. He's done an outstanding job bringing together the narrative and the content for this. Many of you that have contributed data have spoken to Sara, who also was part of the presentation earlier on. Thank you very much for all the work and persistence and follow-up and reminders for people to contribute. Anybody that contributed right off the bat, you're pretty much a hero in my eyes. Claudio brought together the systems, built all the charts and everything that you're able to kind of visually see. Violeta made it all pretty, including the cover that we're able to see here on the left. Not least of all, I want to thank Pablo and Tomas, who are the ones that took on the burden of finding and communicating and maintaining the relationship with the advertisers who are able to fund this entire project. And we'll go into questions and answers before thanking again the sponsors of this event. We'll start off at the beginning. Let's see, Cort, how do you wanna share these questions? Do you have the list of them up?
I
Or I can
do.
read them.
My inclination is to respect their order. So the first one from Ahmed Kablan. The first one, I think it's two questions, are around seasonal variations in production. I think the answer is yes, there are. But this question on the impact of climate change on regional production, with the caveat that I am not a climatologist, I've certainly talked to a lot of experts on this. Dry places are often getting drier, wet places are getting wetter, and the climate is increasingly more disrupted as we get closer to the tropics. Mexico, Central Mexico in particular, is a poster child for some of these challenges, as was Peru during this last extreme El Nino event. But as you get closer to the tropics, we're seeing greater variability. You get closer to the poles or closer to the tropics, you find more extreme variations. And we're not growing blueberries close to the poles, but we are growing them closer to the tropics. And so the disruptions in central Mexico around night temperatures, consistency and timing of precipitation, things like that are playing out in a number of ways. Water availability, Mario has pushed this a lot in a lot of our discussions. Water availability and water quality is becoming a real issue in our industry. Independent of how we think about the climate change component, I would argue there is a strong component there. We have serious water availability issues as well. So there's that one. A gentleman I haven't seen in more than 20 years, Viade Bogokashvili. How are you, my friend? Based on the projected supply increase, what do you anticipate for pricing? Boy, that's dangerous. Colin, big picture, what should we, based on the projected volume, how should we think about average pricing expectations? Averages are dangerous because of how variable they are through the year. What would you expect around pricing over the next 3, 5, and 7 years?
And what I can see from the historic trend is that as blueberries have become a more and more global product, and it is a global product, it's one of the few products that can travel well enough from, for example, Peru or Chile or Morocco, as it were, you're able to serve markets around the globe. As this has become more and more evident within our industry, we've seen prices kind of consolidate around a global average. So what's happening in one region of the world isn't necessarily that isolated from the rest of the world. In any market, what's going to end up happening is prices kind of consolidate around costs. So the regions that are able to reduce and maintain their costs more effectively are going to be able to gain more margins compared to others. And the market price will kind of settle around there. The kind of reference points that we've seen in historic pricing has been around $5, just to kind of throw something out. That doesn't necessarily mean that going forward the standard price will be $5, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does end up coming together closer with the production costs. The last 2 years are maybe not the best example of that. Those are uniquely disruptive years within the blueberry production timeline, the history that we've seen, and we don't expect an El Nino to happen every year or the hangover from it, which we've kind of been living in the market. So if I'm going to do my purely data-centric approach to looking at prices going forward, that would be my standpoint on that. Don't know if there's any big deviations from that.
Well, Colin, actually, I'm going to grab another piece in here going to some of the bimodal trends or price bifurcation trends that we see out there in the industry right now that also has an impact if you move away from averages. Pinar Unsal asked, is there a price differentiation between regular and this ambiguous term premium or jumbo blueberries. I haven't seen them on a price trends graph. No, we don't have that in here. There is a price bifurcation study done by Agronometrics, funded and supported by a number of companies in the industry that came out in the last few months that dives into that with using Peru as an example because the data is available. The proxy it uses for this premium concept doesn't follow size and the actual data on firmness and flavor is not available in the data, but the variety and the source of supply is, and it separates product by variety and source and pricing. And it does give a good sense of the variations in pricing and assumptions we can make around this ambiguous term premiumization. So that is available and it is quite interesting. If memory serves, that premium is showing up in that data set for the last previous year, Colin, I think was about a $2 per kilo, $2 US per kilo premium on average. Does that sound right?
It's $2.13. So
there it is.
Good
now
memory,
that's
good memory.
Yeah, now that's looking backwards, not forwards, right? That's always dangerous, but that's where that's played out. I'm jumping around now, but there's also this question: what about Peru? Will it continue growing with no end? Could they lose money at one moment in the future? Well, anytime anyone says something will never end, that means it's going to end. I don't think that's a business answer. I think that's philosophical. I believe Socrates would say the same. Peru is facing new barriers to sustained growth. Labor is not infinite, land and water is not infinite, and so scaling is more difficult, more expensive. The operating cost on a per unit basis, per hectare or per kilo in Peru is actually higher now than some competitive high chill growing operations in Chile in the Pacific Northwest. What they have is yield and timing and quality and scale. So there are challenges in every industry. Peru does have some unique abilities to scale, and it has been very profitable. But at a certain point, I think we will hit an inflection point. I believe some of that will be driven by price, and a lot of that will be structural: land, water, labor, capital, mainly land, water, labor, and infrastructure.
I think there's a really interesting question from Merit, and I think we're kind of jumping around a bit, but there's way more questions than we're going to be able to get to. We got to kind of make that a reality of this conversation. But what is the weakest month of supply during a calendar year in a global market and European and Middle East market? And this is a really interesting question because it's changed dramatically over the last 5 years.
Yeah, phenomenal. So if we're looking at total volume, the most variable month of the year on year, where some years it's fine and others it's not, is that transition period in the Northern Hemisphere between low chill and high chill. Usually sometime around the last week of May through the last week of June. That is the most variable period on an annual basis, not the lowest volume period at all times, but the most variable transitional period. That transition in February, March is much more stable, and that transition in November, December is much more stable now due to the sources of supply. But focused on the Middle East and Europe, that's actually a big standout. There are also variations in summer supply. And then as it pertains to the Middle East, a lot of that depends on decisions to divert product because there's not a lot of local supply. It's highly dependent on imports. So much of that will be determined not by total global availability, but by the decisions to ship. And that data I do not have. Colin might separately.
I mean, then for the Middle East in particular, you're going to be looking at a lot of supply coming out of South Africa, naturally, and more and more so Morocco. As well, which Morocco shares a season with Mexico, for example, and very closely with Spain. But they seem to have a lot of inroads into African's consumption, the same as South Africa. The Middle East being next to that has been seeing a tremendous amount of growth. And when we looked at the Net Promoter Score for the entire world, the Middle East was one of the most excited regions in the world about blueberries. Still very small, but growing quickly, which is a really interesting little corner of the world to kind of dive deeper into. And we encourage you to do so in the report. I don't want to go into like this huge monologue about the Middle East in this one. We can kind of jump onto, we're kind of at time.
Okay.
So we'll wrap this up with we'll try to see if we can answer some of these questions and send them out to the group. As it is, we had 24 questions and probably answered 5 or 6 of them. But definitely
Colin.
want to, yep.
Hey, Colin, there's one in here that's important. And this is for people's modeling and people's planning, and we still have 200 people here. Mario Flores is asking benchmark yield for competitiveness globally. 5 years from now, Mario, it's going to be between 15 and 20 tons per hectare in a fifth year high chill planting and a third year low zero chill planting. That would be not my guess. That would be where I see it going. And then the question on variety life in budgeting from Adam Selby. For a low zero chill planting, you should be budgeting for variety life of 7 to 9 years and high chill 12 to 16. That would be my strong personal advice on those questions. If you're trying to plan, think that way.
Again, thank you very much to our sponsors and our premium sponsors, which were the report launch sponsors as well. You guys saw them highlighted at the bottom of most every slide that was on this report would not exist if not for their financial contributions. And we want to emphasize and appreciate their contribution not only to the report and also by extent to the industry as a whole. And we'll leave you with access to the report. You're able to use this QR code to gain direct access to the report. If you guys see the website running a bit slowly, last time we did this, we crashed it, which is actually a good sign. I take that as a compliment. And I think before we leave, I was going to ask Mario if you might want to say a couple words.
Yeah.
As we digest all this, which I know is your strong suit, if amongst others.
No, thank you, Paul. No, just to wrap it up, I think the 215, 20 people that were in this call, are clearly a demonstration of the value and interest of what is being done by IBO and the work you've done, to all of you, to this report, just to Colin, Curt, and the group. And I think from this 1 hour, many of us got insights as to doubts, ideas, perception of needs and trends. And so my ask to everyone is, one, if you're not an IBO member, please look on to being part of it, either yourself or through your organizations or companies, please. The second one, please let people know what this meant for you, all right, and the quality of information that was shared. And the third one, as was said, and some of the comments actually in the chat brought it up, the quality of information, I said it before, and you've heard it, really depends on what you provide and what you can bring in to the group to make it stronger and more objective and more reliable. So thank you so much for everyone for being here. And thank you, Colin, Curt, everyone else. Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Cort. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, everybody, for participating. This is a great showing, and I'm really glad that we're able to share this information with the general community. Should you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll look forward to our continued communication as we look to build the 2026 report.
Okay. Ciao, ciao.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Go Blueberries.